Hello, and welcome to this Oracle Cloud HCM session on strategic workforce planning. I'm Nancy Estelle Zoder, Vice President of Product Strategy, and I'm really excited to share our strategy and opportunity with strategic workforce planning. So let's jump right in on why this is so important to HR. Why does strategic workforce planning matter to you? Corporate strategy is only as good as the organization's ability to execute. And corporate planning functions can sit up in that ivory tower and just create the strategy. But if the organization cannot execute, then everyone loses. It's not just about the cost of the workforce, which is the domain of traditional finance led workforce planning, but it's really about the ability of the organization to execute on those strategies, which requires the right resource, of course, most important with the right skills, at the right place at the right time. HR working together with the lines of business with finance is necessary to effectively plan and execute corporate strategic objectives. Strategic workforce planning is the business that translates the long-term corporate strategy into the execution by ensuring that a plan is in place around the workforce. Some examples of those planning needs or disruptions to business are things like changing workforce needs. Some of those examples will include things like, what if you have a need to change the strategy of your workforce as a result of 5% of your employees retiring at a particular point in time? Or perhaps there's a new diversity objective that your organization has put in place. What are the potential impacts of those types of changes? Now, those are internally driven. Now, what about some of the external disruptions or changes to that will impact your workforce, including things like your competitive job market or potentially upskilling as a result of, as an example, the new digital economy. Also, other disruptors include things like new product lines or market expansion, but also things like mergers and acquisitions, all of which will impact what you have planned for today for your workforce, as well as what your plans are going forward. And of course, what we've found is that even in this latest disruption, we have proven that the importance of financial agility is critical for all organizations. Most important, HR plays a critical role in this process, and HR is a necessary partner to finance in developing and, most important, in executing that approved scenario plan. Cash management challenges need to be addressed first, of course, and have a direct impact on human capital management. And we saw this with the layoffs and the furloughs across industries. However, some organizations took a more creative approach as a result of thoughtful planning. And this included things like pay reductions or reduction in hours worked to ensure employees stayed employed. These scenario plans require HR involvement to determine if they're feasible, even before understanding the financial impact. We know that human capital is the most valuable asset of an organization. HR, and especially HR leadership, is a critical partner in the development of the plans and, more importantly, in the execution of those plans. So those plans start with the resources. Of course, for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on the human resources. And organizations need to ensure there is an alignment in their corporate goals and objectives. HR must have the workforce plans in place to support those organizational goals and objectives. And this, of course, starts with the budgetary constraints. But this also requires an understanding of your current skills and how they match up to your goals for the next 12 months, but also for the next 3 to 5 years. This requires visibility into and the input into the scenario plans that have traditionally been managed by finance. HR must propose multiple plans to demonstrate the cost to remain at status quo, reorganize, potentially lay off, maybe hire, or change or reskill their current workforce. That human capital cost will be related to organizations' understanding of the skills needed, the cost of those skills, as well as the cost to reorganize, reassign work, or acquire that new skill. And this is where the alignment of HR and finance is critical. And as we've seen with this disruption, timely execution of these plans is also critical. These plans must not only support the need to ensure productivity of the workforce, but also compliance of any contractual terms and conditions. Having solutions in place to support the development of strategic workforce plans Approvals and executions of those plans is needed to ensure agile organization and to also ensure that you can move quickly to adjusting your goals and objectives and aligning your organizations to those new goals and objectives. So this starts with the ability to view what gaps and skills you have in your organization today and identify how you can fill those gaps. Once those gaps are in fact identified, it's HR's responsibility to determine how to fill those gaps. Though it could include a plan to reorganize, potentially reskill or hire, as I previously mentioned. But these are just some of the drivers. Time and budget are obviously others. So as an example of a use case, and we found this especially important, unfortunately, during this pandemic, is we saw some organizations having to make some pretty tough decisions. And as such, these organizations had to make these decisions to effectively manage their cash flow, of course, first and foremost. But secondly, they had to look at their workforce changes and how they could execute on those workforce changes as a result of their cash flow objectives. Of course, the intent is to contain the cost and ensure compliance, so HR must be involved. In this particular use case, a manufacturing organization made the decision to furlough part of their workforce as a result of reviewing multiple scenario plans developed by finance. And as you can imagine, when you're furloughing parts of the organization, that's an opportunity to contain cost. However, when HR was in fact called in to execute on those plans, they knew this was not an option. The workforce changes that finance proposed to furlough were unionized. HR knew that the action could not be taken without involving union representation and approval, and HR's involvement not only ensured that the organization could stay compliant with their union contracts, but it also ensured that they maintain their relationships with those unions and the union workers. Alignment with planning and execution with both lines of business are necessary, and as this use case has demonstrated, critical to manage cost and compliance. With HR support, finance developed additional scenario plans, and they were able to get the approval to quickly and with compliance execute and communicate those plans. And what's just as important, most of organizations have not had this proactive, structured, or even frequent strategic workforce planning process. As a matter of fact, over 60% of these organizations have in fact been mostly reactive. And we've seen that in this latest pandemic, which can impact cash management. But most importantly, at least from an HR perspective, it impacts employee engagement and productivity. And so this is where strategic workforce planning can support the needs to ensure alignment of finance and HR to effectively manage cash, resource engagement, and productivity. It starts with the executives, who are, of course, the primary owners of these strategic plans. They're the influencers of some of those midterm plans and typically only get involved in current plans, and they're most interested in the status of existing plan and performance, but primarily in an observer monitoring process, monitoring progress. We also have the lines of business and the lines of business managers specifically, as they're responsible for translating some of those midterm and current plans into those executable actions, of course, in conjunction with HR. They make sure that employees are aligning their actions with the overall objectives through goal management and performance monitoring. Additionally, they continue to monitor the progress to the stated objectives and are notified through key performance indicators when their objectives are off track. And then they can immediately take corrective action and, if needed, amend resources or provide input to midterm planners about changes they need to make in order to support those plans. These roles focus on the ability to execute based on short-term plans and reactions. But where we have the opportunity is to ensure alignment with the ability to plan to execute. And this is where these other roles come into play. Financial analysts, of course, manage the plans in terms of financial information, focusing definitely on the revenues, costs, and profitability. Potentially resource planning is an expressed common measurement that finance analysts will keep in mind. Typically, again, looking at investments needed in order to achieve certain objectives. Of course, when we look at financial analysts and their primary objectives, they're really looking at the longer term, although some interest in the midterm strategic planning. HR now, on the other hand, definitely goes into a lot more detail around the workforce themselves, going beyond just the headcount, but really looking at the various attributes associated with the headcount. What we've probably mostly seen, especially in the past couple of years, is around that skills planning. And when there's a skills associated with needed or existing resources, and if there are different diversity requirements, lines of business needs, or even more qualitative measures such as performance indicators, effectiveness measurements for retention and recruiting, or management of skills gaps, HR analysts are needed to identify and analyze those needs and to effectively communicate. And of course, when we think of the plans that HR analysts are most interested in, we're looking at the shorter term, potentially midterm, but obviously have opportunities to extend further. And this is where we want to talk just a little bit about what solutions are in fact available for our Cloud HCM customers. Strategic workforce planning provides that simple, comprehensive solution to manage those scenario plans that are driven effectively by both finance and HR. From the complex, highly regulated industries to those with needs to manage frequent organizational changes to ensuring competitiveness, strategic workforce planning enables our Cloud HCM customers to ensure they're managing to their labor costing needs, as well as the evolving workforce productivity needs. Effective strategic workforce planning includes the ability to manage these key processes, from the ability to assess workforce skills, not just by job, but also by corporate strategic objective, to aligning to those corporate strategic objectives. And in addition to the skills assessment, you need to also understand the demand and the supply, then determine based on that deficit, determine what the gap closing strategy needs to be to execute. This gap closing strategy can be to deploy a training program, perhaps reorganize or hire new resources or outsource. The more scenario plans that are known, the more time you have to execute when there's a disruption to your business. And the process flow requires these steps, from defining strategy to updating assumptions to plan and analyze and to approve the go forward plan. And the most critical step, to execute on that plan to make it effective and ensure success and support those corporate strategic objectives. And so going kind of beyond those processing needs, you will want to ensure you're leveraging a modern platform for planning with integration to various lines of business, as well as further ensure that you break down the silos within your organization to better align and contribute to corporate strategic objectives, which is precisely what strategic workforce planning provides to our Cloud HCM customers. So thank you for your time today. I hope this session demonstrated the importance of strategic workforce planning and HR's role in this critical business function. If you're interested in additional information on this and other Oracle Cloud solutions, please go to cloud.oracle.com/HCM. Thank you.